Mr Speaker.
I call the member for Whitsunday.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. It's indeed a great honour to rise in this place to finally give my address and reply speech, albeit almost 12 months since the last election. Firstly, as the re-elected LNP member for Whitsunday, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country that I continue to proudly represent, the Yuwi, Gia and Naro, and I pay my respects to elders, both past and present. I congratulate you, Mr Speaker, upon your election as the Speaker of the 56th Queensland Parliament and all other members on their electoral success, whilst also pledging my loyalty to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, via His Excellency the Governor of Queensland, to the people of this state, the people of this nation and, last but not least, the good people of Whitsunday. Of course, I'm very biased, Mr Speaker, but I say I represent the best slice of Queensland, in the best state in the nation, and what is still by far the best country on earth. On the mainland in the south, Whitsunday runs from the tip of Slade Point, named by Lieutenant James Cook in 1770, nowadays a suburb of the great city of Mackay, north to Cape Gloucester, also named by arguably the world's greatest explorer after the Endeavour sailed right through the Whitsunday Passage. Along the coast, Mackay's magnificent northern beaches, Seaforth, Cape Hillsborough, Midge Point, Airlie Beach, the heart of the reef, Shute Harbour, once the second busiest passenger port in the nation behind Circular Quay, Dingo Beach, Hideaway Bay and Cape Gloucester. Along the Bruce Highway, all those close-knit, wonderful cane farming towns and villages between Farley and Proserpine, places like Cuttable, home to World War II veteran Monty Edmonds, and the McGill family, whose forebears saddled up 101 years ago in the charge of the Light Horse Brigade at Beersheba. Then you have Mount Ossa, where Nicole Pratt grew up before taking on the world in tennis, attending school just up the road in Caelan, once home to my late mother, my sisters, and where my relatives to this day still live and farm the land. Further north, Bloomsbury, another place where cane and cattle is king, thanks to more hard-working local families who've toiled away, in many cases for decades. And on to Proserpine, the great sugar milling town that is, and also home to my office, a fantastic community it certainly is. And we shouldn't forget our islands, from Keswick and St Bees in the south through to Hamilton and Hayman in the north, home to people as well, real people, not just palm trees. All up 6,000 square kilometres, encompassing an incredible part of the world. Is that any wonder they still call me the member for Paradise? As we all know, politics is a tough game, and without being schooled up many years ago, I would not have won one election, let alone three. And on that note, I want to acknowledge my three political mentors: former meat worker, the late L.B. Schultz, the former federal member for Hume, whom I served all the way back in 2001, and subsequently North Queensland-based Senator Ian McDonald, and then Federal Sports Minister Senator George Brandis QC, whom I was proud to advise on sport policy at the back end of the Howard government. Between them, across local, state and federal governments, they served their constituents for 82 years. Clearly, I learned a thing or two along the way. And speaking of politicians, I want to especially thank the member for Broadwater, the first Shadow Minister to come to Whitsunday after the election, which also marked his return to his place. Welcome back, my friend. We go back, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to 1995, when I was a schoolboy, when he was a schoolboy in Ingham, and myself reading the television news across North Queensland and calling the first ever
Order, members.
Game.
Order. Member, you have the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I might add, it's the same MP who was responsible for bringing me back to Queensland more than a decade ago, having the time of my life, calling the NRL on Fox Sports, living my childhood dream, and it was the now member for Broadwater who brought us back through his old boss, Senator McDonald. Well, he truly recognises the importance of tourism, Deputy Speaker, in our part of the world, and from memory, the Shadow Minister, in fact, has made no less than 5 visits to our region since taking on that job, and of course tourism so critical to Airlie Beach and our Whitsunday Islands, and hence my concerns for public safety in our community after last week's terrible tragedy in Sid Harbour. Many people don't even realise that the Whitsundays is now the #1 entry point into the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. And no disrespect to the far north, we've achieved that without an international airport. That's something I hope to change one day, lending itself perhaps to a casino resort development in the Whitsundays, possibly even one of our islands, to generate jobs and prosperity for locals. And those islands, of course, have done it tough since Cyclone Debbie more than 18 months ago. This is why I can't believe the government, Deputy Speaker, has this $50 million fund to rejuvenate our Great Barrier Reef islands, yet half of it is going to Great Keppel Island. Where? In the Labor-held seat of Keppel. What about the Whitsundays? No surprise that the Tourism Minister said nothing about this when visiting Airlie last month for our Tourism Awards, where local businessman Kevin Collins told me face-to-face about his concerns for the future of local seafood in our restaurants should Labor bring in new regulations which will only undermine tourism, small business and more. I say to the Minister, come back up and listen to the locals, KC and the gang, people like Kelly Morgan from Morgan's Fish Market in the Northern Beaches and David Caracciolo from Mackay Reef Fish Supplies. They're all scared these new regulations will send the little bloke in commercial fishing to the wall and lead to more imports of seafood, something I'm totally against. I say to the Minister also, what happened to that prediction here in the Parliament last year? For those unaware, the member for Cooper stood up in here or sat in here and told the House on 22 August last year, quote, "You're dead, D-E-A-D," unquote. Well, guess what, member for Cooper? In the words of Sir Elton John, I'm still standing. As for the bikini-bashing member for South Brisbane, I say thank you for picking a fight, through you, Mr Deputy Speaker, with yours truly, because it was thanks to Bikini Gate, sponsored by the member for South Brisbane, who helped me promote the Whitsundays to the world. A whole new audience, and for free, Deputy Speaker. In fact, one of the British tabloids picked up the story and even referred to us as the Deputy Premier. Perhaps an omen. Who knows? I got a Deputy Speaker, despite the damage,
Order, members. Order. Order. Members. Order, members. Member for Whitsunday, you have the call.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Despite the damage caused by the tragic... Well, I was going to touch on a very sombre note here because I was going to talk about the tragic events of the last few weeks. So I asked for members to stop laughing. And I say, despite the damage caused by those tragic events to our reputation and also stemming on from Cyclone Debbie, I think there are some exciting things coming out of the Whitsundays, Deputy Speaker, going forward with the redevelopment of Daydream Island progressing well. I know the member for Mackay's not sure where Daydream is, but it is progressing well, and I look forward to joining Dawson Tang, Mark Fletcher and their Chinese investors for the reopening next year. Likewise, I eagerly anticipate the reopening of the Hayman Island Resort under the Intercontinental brand. Of course, we've seen some amazing post-cyclone work on Hamilton Island, thanks largely to the Oatley family. And whilst we lost Bob a couple of years ago, the family's passion for tourism and giving people an incredible experience in paradise has not waned one iota. And on that note, I salute the man we call the Governor, Glenn Burke, who heads up Hamilton Island Enterprises, and all his staff who do a superb job. I also recognise people like Helen Scott and Caroline and Dexie Murray and Co on Long Island for their work on Palm Bay, at Palm Bay Resort. It's doing well as well. And back on the mainland, we've seen the emergence of northerlies, the award-winning northerlies overlooking Woodwark Bay. And across the water, of course, the multi-award-winning Able Point Marina, where owner Paul Darazette has invested big coin. He's transformed that place. And unlike Labor's Tourism Minister, not just talking a good game, but playing one as well. In tourism, I'll continue to fight for projects like the Visitor Information Centre we need on the Bruce Highway coming into Proserpine, an ironclad commitment from me and the LNP going into the last election compared to a big fat zero from Labor. We also need that RV park for Proserpine, another pre-election commitment from the LNP last year. I also want to see if Proserpine gets that regional export distribution centre the government is funding. Frankly, we should be a good chance. We grow all these fruit and vegetables just up the road in Bowen. We've got the jet airport at Proserpine, plenty of room for expansion. And I know that's something that the Chamber of Commerce is well aware of, and I thank President Bob Bogey, Karen Vlodermans and others for supporting us along these lines. Recreational fishing, Deputy Speaker, plays a big role in attracting tourists, and I'm proud to have secured an upgraded boat ramp for Dingo Beach, as opposed to Labor's crazy plan to put one on Blackcurrant Island against community wishes. We need more marine infrastructure, including the southern part of my electorate, places like Murray Creek, now Mount Pelion. After all, it's along that stretch of coast, Deputy Speaker, where we have the net-free fishing zone. but we've seen very little marketing from Tourism Events Queensland. In fact, we can't even get Labor to completely seal the Mount Isa Seaforth Road, which would surely attract more tourists off the Bruce to places like Seaforth and Cape Hillsborough. And speaking of roads, I'll continue to maintain the rage to fix the Bruce. Yes, you've heard it before, but I won't rest on this. Specifically, flood mitigation at Gorganga Plains. More broadly, of course, improving the surface of the road between Pindi and Coolachoo. Fair dinkum, that road of the Bruce Highway, or that section of the Bruce, probably has more cracks than Humpty Dumpty after the fall. And enough is enough. We also need to finally fix Hamilton Plains, just outside Proserpine. That's that flood-prone section of the Shute Harbour Road. And look, I set up camp there, Deputy Speaker, last year, campaigned to fix it, knowing again we had an LNP funding commitment. What did we get from Labor? A big fat zero. Well, a business case at best, which must be, I dare say, collecting some dust here in Brisbane. People don't want a business case. Even the grade ones at Cannonvale get this. They understand that Airlie Beach and Cannonvale gets cut off from Proserpine, where the local hospital is, when we have a decent wet season. That's hardly acceptable in this day and age. The wet season, of course, is always unpredictable, but what we do know is that it actually rains in North Queensland, and we need to build key water infrastructure such as dams. And I've said many times before in this place, the first cab off the rank should be my pet project, the Urana Dam. Only a few weeks ago we had National Water Week, but where was Labor's announcement of new water infrastructure for the north? Not only do we need Urana on the western side of the Clark Range to boost food and fibre production, to facilitate new mining projects, to deliver long-term water security for the Whitsundays, we also need energy security for the north, and specifically cheaper and reliable electricity. And hence I continue to fight for a state-of-the-art coal-fired power station at Collinsville. I'm not against renewables, Deputy Speaker, I'm not against renewables, but we've got to get the balance right. And with copious amounts of coal just over the range, we should be burning it, albeit cleaner and smarter, just like other countries. Not every, but many traditional Labor voters even agree with me, and they can't believe 21st century Labor has gone so far to the left they now see coal as a dirty word. We even saw Mike Brunker, aka Moscow, doing a backflip on this in the lead-up to the poll. Fair dinkum, with that sort of form, he should be off to Tokyo in 2020 for the Olympics with the Australian gymnastics team. Our farmers, Deputy Speaker, they continue to do it tough under the high price of power to irrigate their crops, remembering that along with tourism, sugar is an economic driver in my part of the world. In fact, in Queensland, a $2 billion industry, and it needs help more than ever before. Help with the cost of power, help with the cost of water, help with increasing red tape under Labor, help with these de facto trade wars. As the Minister for Trade, the Premier should have gone to India by now to put the acid on the Indian government, which is subsidising their farmers, resulting in 5 million tonnes of sugar flooding the world market. What happens? A 10-year low in the world price of sugar. And for farmers in my patch, certainly from Farley to Foxdale and from Coningsby to Crystal Brook, they need that like a hole in the head. We also need more funding for sugar research, remembering that we had record funding under the LNP in this space, but typical of Labor, they've shunned the industry. And not only do I want R&D funding restored to those old levels, I tonight call on government, state and federal, along with industry, to work together to bring Sugar Research Australia to Mackay, Australia's sugar capital, remembering that Mackay was previously home to the internationally acclaimed Sugar Research Institute. The city that I represent also serves our multi-billion-dollar coal industry, and with many coal workers and contractors, as you know, Deputy Speaker, in my electorate, current and former. And on that note, I call on Labor to hurry up establishing the Mine Safety and Health Authority in Mackay, in keeping with the recommendations of the Coal Workers Pneumoconiosis Select Committee that included myself. The problem we've got, Deputy Speaker, is that in central, north and far north Queensland, pen pushers and pollies in Brisbane more than 1,100 k's from my little office, and they make decisions about people and places they know very little about. And it's these people who are increasingly frustrated, and I'll say, if we don't get our fair share, not just in terms of finance, but in terms of respect and responsibility, we'll see the calls for separation from the rest of the state become louder and louder, and from more credible sources. Am I calling for separation? No, I'm not, Deputy Speaker. But I'll say it again, if things don't change, those calls to break away will become more vociferous than ever. And that brings me to the issue of representation. It's dead set embarrassing that I'm just one of only 2 LNP members north of Bundaberg in this House, but let's not beat around the bush. We only have ourselves to blame. I'm not going to stand up here and say otherwise. And I stand by my comments in the Sunday Mail after our latest defeat when I famously declared, and I quote, "We couldn't sell ice to an Afghani camel driver." End of quote. Our primary vote in central, north and far north Queensland was diabolical, and one only has to look at the neighbouring seat of Moranni, held by the LNP or the Nationals for 70-odd years until 2015. Since then, 2 defeats, the last one, no surprise, our candidate winning just 2 booths. Embarrassing. It's worth remembering the same candidate tried to roll me 4 years ago before the current member for Moranni did a job on him. And I congratulate the member for Moranni on his win, also acknowledging him as the first person of Australian South Sea Islander descent to be elected to this place. It's true we have some amazing people in the LNP in the north, people like Peter Lindsay, for example, who I've known since 1992. He'll always put Castle Hill ahead of Spring Hill, and he should be commended, not castigated. And it's my view the former member for Herbert, who won 10 elections between local and federal, he should be back in the fold. And ditto my good mate from the west, long-time Mayor John Wharton. Wardo tells it straight, always has, always will, and he should be back in the tent too. This is why other political parties are doing well at our expense, and the bleeding's got to stop. Otherwise we may as well pack up north of the Tropic of Capricorn. Communities I know so well, from Capricorn to the Cape and Carmilla to Cardwell. It's a crying shame we're not in a position to try and rehabilitate our vote in those communities. For the vanquished in Whitsunday, firstly the Labor candidate, a serial pest, 3-time loser, didn't even have the decency to ring us to say well done, and I say that in contrast to the former Labor member for Whitsunday, who was all class. Then we have the One Nation candidate. Well, poorest performer of his mob in North Queensland, didn't take the advice of my old mate Sam Cox, who told his mates to leave me alone. They failed to listen. Then we had Katter's Australia Party candidate, the former mayor of Whitsunday, jumped out of a plane at Hamilton Plains. Well, we don't want stunts, we want the road fixed. And what happened to her? Well, she was the worst performer for her team in the state. On primary vote, she couldn't even beat the GST. Not that the Premier would get that. Finally, you don't stand up in here without help. And I want to salute the many people in Whitsunday who did their bit to make sure I return to this place. And what a great honour and privilege it is. I want to thank my SEC executive in Whitsunday, all of them volunteers, of course, Chairman Richard Firewood, Tricky Dicky, one of the greatest men in Early Beach, ably backed up by Dion Attard, aka the Maltese Falcon. Then we have our Secretary, Ange Nixon. I call her Wonder Woman. She might be a bit embarrassed, Deputy Speaker, back in Bukasia hearing that, but without Ange it may well have been a different story. So to Ange, sincere thanks. Our booth workers were incredible, as were our helpers in general. Fred Renke, Lillian Orr, Manuela Leash, Barry Humphries, Marvin Dykey, Andrew Jeffrey, Annie Judd, Les Durnsford, Neil Pratt, Trudy and Graham Roberts. Graham, the grandson of the former, in fact the original member for Whitsunday, the late Lloyd Roberts. Kay and Doug Peterson, John Powell, Dave Young, Dave McInerney, Karen Tickle, Tony and Josie Perner, Adrian Zarb, Peter Byers, Len Falaba, Tracy and Jason Newitt, Angus Newitt, Robin Halls, Maxine Bassett, Pauline Ogilvie, Peter Lewis, Joan Hughes, Margot Stanley, Sonia Kioski, Gloria Demartini, Maren Matthew, the late David Matthew, who only died a few days ago, Craig Bethel, Ralph Cox, Margaret Cox, Tony Brosnans, Christine Allen, Dee Middendorp, Hacking, John Hacking, Pete Coulson, Mick Selms, Murray, Graham Cumming, Trevor Genvy, and on it goes, and I apologise to anyone I've left out. My sincere thanks from the bottom of my heart. I especially want to thank the Cox family in my electorate, particularly sisters Jennifer and Bonnie Ruth. They rode up the main street of Proserpine with me the day before the poll. They deserve a medal. They even put up with those stinky green protesters who invaded my office apparently that day. Faust IGA, well, they ran out of Rexona. That's how much they stunk. I also want to thank my staff, Claire Nixon, the daughter of Wonder Woman, she must be Wonder Girl, Zach Davis Hancock, aka Zulu Zach, he's the brains behind the operation, Jackie Spruce and Teresa O'Regan. I've got to say one of the great masterstrokes of the campaign, Deputy Speaker, probably was enlisting the help of a well-known business identity and a decent man. I'm referring to the former One Nation member for Whitsunday, Harry Black, who in that final week of the campaign publicly declared his support for me, calling on One Nation voters to back me and disregard One Nation's preferencing of Labor. So to Harry and wife Bonnie I say thanks. And likewise to Harry's old boss in this place, former One Nation leader and member for Caboolture, Bill Feldman, who also backed me in that final few days of the campaign after his farewell from the police service in Whitsunday. It's a privilege to be back in this place, Deputy Speaker, And I come back to what I said in my maiden speech back in 2012 when I touched on the famous words of Sir Robert Menzies, who always promised to stand up for the forgotten people. To them and everyone else back home, as a proud fifth-generation local with family roots going back to 1865, I say I'll continue to be your real voice for the North.
Thank you, Member for Whitsunday. Call the member for Pine Rivers.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'd like